So, this is a fascinating topic, and I wouldn't say that we're in the dollar inflationary, hyperinflationary camp. Brett Johnson of Santiago Funds on Twitter has this famous milkshake theory, in which he believes, before the sort of collapse of the global system, the U.S. dollar will become more and more strong as people sort of scramble for the cleanest dirty shirt in the closet. We're probably closer to his views. Another thing to think about with the U.S. dollar that people forget is, if you limit the sort of denominator to the population of the United States, the amount of money printing going on is pretty staggering. But if you remember that the dollar is used by an ever-growing number of people around the world, and their need for liquidity is very powerful, if you put that population in the denominator, then the level of printing in the U.S. is a little bit less catastrophic, I would say. But I do believe that, if just one way that we like to think about it, sort of if a trend reverses, what were the initial sort of outcomes of the trend, and will those reverse as well? So the past 40 years have been marked by decreasing interest rates, deflation, relative global peace, with the exception of the concocted wars of the West. And all of that is sort of coming undone now. Free trade was getting less and less difficult. The world was expanding its free trade. It was protected by, the U.S. Navy, with the U.S. pulling back. We could see a fracturing. We could see a two-currency system. Watching very carefully what the BRICS are doing. Brazil, Russia, India, China, Saudi Arabia. Might they develop, a more cohesive way for them to transact? You have countries with excess energy selling to countries with excess manufacturing capacity, and if they can net out the differences between them without having to go through the U.S. dollar, then they might have a semblance of independence. And so if we have going from a unipolar to a multipolar world, which is sort of the biggest trend that's unfolding, then I think you see the reverse of what we've seen in the last 40 years, which is higher interest rates, sustained inflation, reshoring of manufacturing. And so those are sort of the big trends that we see, and time will tell. But it is truly, as you say, and as we started this conversation, as a result of energy scarcity, we're seeing these massive, these just tectonic plates type shifting in the macro picture, and it's incredibly difficult to model. And so I wouldn't be in the camp of an imminent demise of the U.S. dollar. The euro is a whole different question. It always does seem that we're on the edge of sort of a fragmentation of the EU, which is kind of ironic that Lagarde, the head of the European Central Bank, has unveiled a new policy tool called the anti-fragmentation policy, which is, and nobody knows what it is yet. It feels kind of like a big bluff, but we shall see. Look, I think in the long run, that which cannot go on forever usually doesn't. You can't keep going, printing your way into trying to create energy from fiat. Putin was handed the keys to Europe's energy future and was emboldened to act in the Ukraine because he felt like he had all the leverage. It's bearing out that he did, in fact, have a lot more leverage than Western leaders thought he did, especially when they put in the sanctions regime, which we have been saying has been flawed from the start. And by the way, it is not anti-patriotic to point out that our policy won't work and perhaps suggest a policy that would. It's the opposite, but we've caught a lot of heat for saying that the sanctions are only helping Putin and enabling him. And I'm happy to explain why that is if you're interested. But, that which can't go on forever usually doesn't. The standard sort of spread between Italian tenure and German tenure is a sort of classic dashboard indicator of depth of crisis. Perhaps they'll muddle along, but we shall see. It certainly, the project is at perhaps its most precarious moment, at least since the global financial crisis. But I would say perhaps even more precarious than that. It's really going to be a fascinating few months. And as we said, the resolution of the energy crisis going into the winter, I think, will be highly informative as to how this will all play out.